Tundra presents The Mayor Helps with the Mayor of Victoria, British Columbia, Lisa Helps. Have your say. Send your questions and comments to themayorhelps.com. They could be included in next week's
Victoria
show.
Businesses to know that we're working.
And now, here's your host from beautiful Victoria, British Columbia, Dave Hatt.
Well, welcome to the Mayor Helps. My name is Dave Hatt, and I'm here with Mayor Lisa Helps of Victoria, BC. Mayor, good morning. How are you today?
I'm very well. Another fine Wednesday morning. I think the rain's starting to come down out there, so fall is here, and yeah, we're still in the middle of a global health pandemic, but we're doing the best we can here to make our way through and support everyone through it.
I got to say that this week I was the happiest I've ever been to see rain. To hopefully, I always wanted to have a giant fan so we could sort of blow it south to help our friends south and put out some of those fires. It was nice to see the smoke going away here, and I hope that it's going away there as well. That was pretty ugly for a while.
Yeah, all the way down the coast, hey, Washington, Oregon, and California.
Yeah, you bet. So this week we had an election that's been called by our province, Premier Horgan. So wanted to get your thoughts on it when you're in your position and you hear that. What do you think about it?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. There's a story in the paper today that I haven't read yet about some, alleged acrimony between the parties. That's all the headline says, so I can't say any more than that. Because I think Premier Horgan called the election so that he could test the waters for a majority government, and we'll see how that goes. I mean, there are people who are trying to make the election issue about whether there should be an election or not. I think there is an election, so let's just deal with that reality in front of us. As mayors across the province, in cities from the coast to the north to the interior, we started meeting a couple of weeks ago in anticipation of the election, and there are a number of us with serious concerns about some of the things we're seeing on our streets in our downtowns in terms of untreated mental health and addictions. Also the need for more affordable housing. Also, a new kind of relationship between cities and the provincial government. We can talk about that in a moment. And then, public transit. So I think those are the four, expanded public transit. Those are the four issues that I think will come to the fore in terms of urban areas in British Columbia that there are probably about 12 of us will really be, putting out there and talking to repeatedly so that those get attention from all of the parties that are running. So it's a real opportunity to make our case, in other words.
Well, in this time during this pandemic that we're all experiencing, I know later on today we're going to be speaking with a gentleman who is developed a fund for Indigenous businesses, and so it's a grassroots solution to a bigger picture problem. And I see that as a correlation between the city and the province. I know that there's been a lot of blame has been laid, in particular at your feet, about the homelessness issue, when in fact, it's, as you've mentioned on more than one occasion, that is the purview of the province, but because it's healthcare and because that's what they deal with. And also the COVID thing shut down all these beds. So to have the opportunity to be able to develop a stronger relationship with the province to support the municipalities, Victoria and Vancouver, I'm sure.
And Prince George and Kamloops and Kelowna, and I mean it's and Nanaimo. This is really, I was very surprised on this call with all the mayors. We were okay, so what's your number one issue? And without question, that was Abbotsford, that is the number one issue. And it's not housing. I think we talk about housing and homelessness a little bit, as if that's a catch-all for everything, but it's people with severe mental health and addictions challenges who are living on our streets who don't have health care. That's going to be one of the issues that we're, from Abbotsford to Prince George to Nanaimo to Victoria to Vancouver. That's one of the things we're really going to be trying to make a case to anyone, any one of the parties that will take that seriously, because I think, the provincial government has done a really good job. The recovery strategy is good that was announced last Friday. The 1.5 billion. I think they've done a good job getting as much as they can out of Ottawa. They've obviously done a very good job handling the pandemic. On the climate side, Clean BC is a really decent plan that they're continuing to invest in. The affordable housing, has been rolling out unit by unit, and the one giant gap is, people with untreated health conditions living outside in doorways and on streets and in parks throughout urban British Columbia. And that's really, hopefully will get some attention and focus during the election campaign, but then after it, some serious investment.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, I think it's something that it is the single biggest issue that I see people speaking of here in Victoria. It's something where it's, people that Joe and Jane Blow on the street. I mean, they're the ones that are echoing these sentiments that, the homelessness has got to change. The issue's got to change, and, looking at it holistically and saying, well, how is the province going to be able to help support the municipalities? Because ultimately we're the ones, the people that live in the city, the residents of the city, the ones that deal with people that aren't getting the help and the support that they need.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there's a lot of work to do. I mean, I was on CBC radio this morning with Mayor Krogh and Mayor Wickstrom from up in Port McNeill, and Mayor Krogh, it felt like we were almost speaking in stereo. He talked about the negative impact that people who are untreated and living outside have on businesses and residents, and and the very vulnerable nature of them themselves. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how the parties respond, because we need solutions in months, not years, and that needs to be, if we're going to have a strong recovery in urban British Columbia, mental health and addictions treatment is going to be a key part of that.
It's absolutely critical. Well, thank you for this, and we'll chat with you on the other side. Thanks, Mayor Helps.
You there? Okay.
And now, Mayor Lisa Helps sits down with this week's special guest.
Welcome to the Mayor Helps. Today we've got Jeff Sear from Raven Indigenous Capital Partners. Jeff, I believe you're in Ottawa. Good morning and welcome to the Mayor Helps.
Yes, good morning. I am on ceded Algonquin territory here in Ottawa.
Well, welcome to our show. And Mayor Lisa Helps is on here as well. Good morning, Mayor.
Good morning. And we're here on Lekwungen territory this morning, the Songhees and Esquimalt homelands.
So first things first, a little bit of informality. Jeff, you mentioned just before we were on air, there is a bag over your shoulder, a wall mounted. And can you describe that, please? It was a pretty a neat story.
Yeah, it's a traditionally beaded octopus bag, which Métis hunters and military folk would use. And it used to hold like bone knives and gunpowder and different things that they needed. And of course, there were ceremonial versions, which that primarily is. And my father made it for my birthday, actually, last month. So I was pretty excited to receive that piece of history.
Well, it's fabulous. It's a great story. I like it very much. My wife and my kids are Métis. They're from. My wife is from Sault Ste. Marie, and my kids are born here. So they've done the research, and they're card-carrying members of the Métis Nation here in British Columbia. And it was interesting because last week we spoke with Evan Slater from Métis Financial. I don't know if you know Evan at all. I
just know him by name.
It was a great conversation. Mayor and I were able to chat with him. So maybe you could explain a little bit about Raven Indigenous Capital Partners. It's a fund, from what I can tell, it's a fund where you raise money to help holistically First Nations businesses progress through their business plan. Can you tell us maybe how you got started in this?
Sure. I'll give you a Coles Notes version of it. There's a long sort of creation story behind Raven. I came out of a national leadership position for an Indigenous organization called the National Association of Friendship Centers after a 6-year stint there, and many other sort of national leadership positions, with a clear line of sight that there were things missing for Indigenous entrepreneurs and Indigenous businesses and Indigenous communities in order for our people to succeed. And one of the most glaring things was access to patient flexible capital. And, I've been working in the Indigenous social innovation space for a while, and that was one of the big things that folks complained about. So we kind of sat back, and I'd run across a gentleman named Stephen Nairn, who's our chief investment officer. He'd been doing impact investing in sub-Saharan Africa for about 15 years, really a world-class leader in it. He was moved by TRC calls to action and what the business community can do, and wanted to come back to Canada to work with our people here. And then eventually we rounded the triumvirate with my good friend and business partner, Paul Lacerte. So the three of us formed Raven Capital. At the heart of Raven Capital, our first goal was to build an Indigenous impact fund to invest in Indigenous enterprises, businesses. And the capital that we saw missing was primarily in what we call smaller ticket sizes and early growth stage businesses. So a business that needs somewhere from $250,000 upwards towards about $2 million of equity. Now, one of the things in Canada that's very interesting for Indigenous people is there's capital is very hard to get for Indigenous businesses because of systemic racism and other issues, and and intergenerational wealth and collateral. But what capital does exist is almost universally debt-based or collateral-based capital. So you got to put up your home or some other kind of collateral in order to finance your business. And while that's a very important part of the ecosystem, it's if you really want to grow certain businesses, and here I would take tech, e-commerce, health, other businesses, you really need equity. So equity, and what we specialize in is, from an Indigenous perspective, is providing flexible, patient capital that works with the entrepreneur's goal of what they want to do with their businesses. And so our first goal and focus was to build the fund, and we set out to do a $5 million demonstration fund in early 2019, just to prove that, hey, you can invest in Indigenous people, and hey, it can be a success. Go figure. And what happened with that is we were asked by several investors after the first year, we were getting close to our what they call a final closing of a fund, to hold it open. They saw a lot of potential in there. So long story short, we've been continually asked to hold it open, and we've done an interim closing of the fund. We'll do a final closing this December. And that final closing will be somewhere between 18 and 20 million. So we overshot our mark by a little bit. And it is a sign of a couple of things: the health of Indigenous businesses, investor interest in driving real impact on the ground, and seeing it through the work that we do with our fund. So those sort of things combined, even in a COVID environment, to kind of boost the investment amount. And I'm happy to say we got a couple investors from the United States, a couple large investors from the US coming in as well. So maybe I'll stop there. So I can go on forever about Raven. I don't want that.
Oh, it's fascinating hearing about it. I've been in the world of trying to raise capital for a small business, and I did want to ask you specifically, where you say because there's a perception among Canadians, that some Canadians anyway, that there's lots of money for First Nations, that there's the government throws tons of money. I mean, it's interesting because we do have a mayor on the line, so we like to kind of address both sides of the government side as well as the business side. So when you say it's difficult to access that capital, but the perception is there's tons of money being thrown at First Nations, where's the disconnect? Where's the breakdown?
Well, I'll give you my perspective. I don't know if Lisa wants to comment, but my perspective is the nature of what you hear about in the general media about capital going to investment into Indigenous communities is often in the form of what I would call statutory responsibilities of federal and provincial governments. It's their statutory responsibility to provide, healthcare dollars and, even ECDEV, education, infrastructure dollars. That is not
clean water, clean water.
There, for example. So you get an announcement of, $250 million is going into clean water, which really, pardon the pun, is a drop in the bucket for the clean water problem. But that is not investment into social enterprises, not investment into businesses per se. The funding that comes in, that most Canadians feel that all Indigenous people have, tax-free income, and this is not the case. Everyone gets free education. This is not the case, and we've been dispelling those myths for years in this space. So what people hear in the media reported is vastly different than what's available in the ecosystem. And what I would put out as a comment out there is that when you look at financing for business, it comes across a spectrum. And it's based on the size of your business, the type of business, and what you need to grow at different points in time. Now, the good thing is for the rest of Canada, there's a whole flush ecosystem that exists of players along the way. In the Indigenous side, you have very niche, small players doing niche things with Indigenous businesses. And there's just a gap. There's significant gaps. And there's lots of studies about these gaps from CCAB and others.
So now you've stepped in to fill the gap. Raven Indigenous Capital Partners. You're a year and some in, maybe 2 years in. Is the money going out? What's the response been from businesses? How does this impact kind of I'll just leave those two questions, and I've got another question after that. But how's it going so far?
So, well, as you heard from my earlier comment, the response from the investor side of the spectrum has been of like an increasing amount of momentum and energy towards it. What an interesting side note to that is when we started this, we realized that we're the only Indigenous equity provider in Canada. There are other providers of different types of capital, loan capital in particular. Then as we continued to do our work, we realized we're the only Indigenous equity provider in North America. Then we realized we're the only Indigenous equity provider, including New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Latin America, Pacifica, Amazonia. So we thought, oh, this is a fairly unique position, to be in, to kind of see that. So that's the one thing, global attention. But we've made 6 investments to date. The first one was in Victoria. Well, it was on Songhees First Nations in Victoria with a company called Anamiki, who you may or may not know.
Yeah, we know them well. They're amazing here. They're one of our small but mighty powerhouses.
They for sure are real innovators in the space. And that we did a $1 million investment, 250,000 of which was with BDC to come in from some operating capital. That's proved really well. We've done 5 other investments since then. We're going to our investment committee next month on 3 more that we've been looking at quite hard, doing due diligence on, even during COVID. We did 2 investments on March 27th. So even at the height of COVID, when we knew what was going on and we expected and projected significant economic slowdown, the Indigenous businesses themselves that we invested in were doing extraordinarily well during COVID. 5 of the 6 put up record profits, sales, and growth. We have one of the really exciting parts about this is what we refer to as deal pipeline. So how many more deals like this exist in Canada? What's the ecosystem really look like? And we have a deal pipeline that probably exceeds 35 or 40. And a lot of that's coming to us now looking for capital, which is really, really heartwarming to see that there's that much innovation and entrepreneurship in the ecosystem looking for capital to do things. Did I answer your question, Lisa? Probably.
Yeah, no, you really did. No, that's what I wanted to know. How many companies had benefited so far, and how are they doing? Another question, you kind of touched on this a little bit, is you said it's heartwarming, but so tell us a little bit more about how it feels. Essentially, you're the only ones in the world that are doing this. There's this whole kind of untapped, latent demand from Indigenous entrepreneurs across the country. How does it feel to be in this position to be able to support them? And does it have anything to do? Do you think about kind of Carol Ann Hilton, who is also from Hesquit territory here on the island? You probably know her. She, talks about indigenomics and the building of the Indigenous economy in Canada. And how does it feel to be part of that? And are there elements of decolonization or any of those kinds of things? Do you think about those kinds of things in your work?
So we are fundamentally keep ourselves up at night thinking about these things. So for full disclosure, Caroline sits on our investment committee. So
great. She's a very wise woman.
Yeah, very important for us to have her skill set with us as we make these investments, and for her to see the on the ground what happens at an individual business level. So it's heartwarming, but it's also a ton of responsibility and work on the other side. We realize that we cannot fail.
Mhm.
If you fail, then you put a spike in the ecosystem for a good decade. So we feel an immense responsibility towards what we're doing and raising an impact fund and deploying it successfully. What we've discovered and what we say is what we're trying to do is, on the goal setting side, is build a reconciliation economy. On an individualized level, we are committed to the process of what we call decolonizing investment. Now, I wish that was an end state. It's really a journey, and we're learning as much as we are with our entrepreneurs along the way. But what it means is that we approach these businesses differently, in the sense that we have a phrase that we often say is that we're profit seeking but not profit maximizing. Meaning we're an impact first fund. We're seeking the social and community level impact alongside, but not suborn to the financial impact. So that's really what we're focused on. Now, what does decolonizing impact investment really mean? Well, the first thing it is, in my opinion, is our people look at money differently and look at wealth differently. I don't know if you probably had enough experience, both Lisa and Dave, in this on the West Coast, that a lot of the times hoarding wealth, like amassing wealth, is seen as an illness. Our societies were designed to actually give wealth away. That's what the potlatch system, one of the key components of it, is to distribute wealth. And chief in communities was often one of the poorest people in the community, poor in terms of physical goods, but rich in relationship and rich in those other components. So when we talk about decolonizing investment, we have that sort of thinking in our head about how do we make sure that the Indigenous owners keep as much of their business as possible as they would like. So we want to make sure they keep ownership as long as possible, that we build wealth and value with them along the journey, and they can do with that wealth and value as they see fit. Most of those businesses are, they're driving it back into community, they're driving it back into scholarships and internships and doing all kinds of things at a community level. The other part about it means is we want those responsible exits from those business. We really want to be cautious. So some people want a strategic to acquire them. Like a big strategic company doing the same thing would come along and acquire them. And they're comfortable with that because they want to take the wealth that they amass from that and come back to our side of the table and invest in more Indigenous entrepreneurs to grow the ecosystem. So it depends how they look. Some of them want to spread it out and give it to community. How do I give my business to community? Or some of them want to have a slower growth rate, but a deeper resilience, so that it lasts a long time and employs more people and has more community-wide benefit over time. So it all depends on what that looks like. I mean, we run these things across SDGs as well. I don't think that's rocket science work to do, have the impact that the SDGs out there. But we also have an Indigenous impact metrics framework, which we start at the Indigenous impact side, and then we kind of build out that way.
So what are some of the businesses that are coming to the industries that are interested in, people are looking to get funding for? Is it mostly tech or what's happening? You mentioned that several of the organizations with whom you work did very well through the initial stages of COVID, were making record profits. What are some of the industries that people are interested in tapping into?
So when we started the fund, we were sector agnostic. We didn't really care. We needed to see what the ecosystem would kick up. We had some ideas before going in and some relationships. We've had a natural clustering of our existing investment into tech and tech-enabled businesses, and then into e-commerce enabled businesses. So businesses that were e-commerce before it was as trendy as it is today to be e-commerce. And so that's just a natural clustering. Those were, the right type of businesses at the right time where we can provide value to them. Now, in the deal flow, and some of them provide products and services, which we would call products and services from the land and sea, natural, Indigenous products and epistemology, and how these products are developed using traditional knowledge. But also we were approached, we didn't invest, I think good for us, I think, fortuitously, in ecotourism, a couple indigenous eco. So it's really across the spectrum that's coming to us, from, innovative tech to innovative products for consumers, to backbone IT, to virtual assistants, to software tech. Like, it's really all over the map, Dave, in that. And we choose the businesses on the impact side and on the financial side. It's not really about the sector. And I have to tell you that we really invest in people as opposed to ideas. We want to see a strong entrepreneur who really knows their numbers, who's committed to what they're doing and has a good impact narrative. Sometimes we help them build those things along the way. But it's sort of sector agnostic in how we approach the fund, but it's naturally clustered to one side, which is neither here nor there to us at the moment. I suspect we're going to go for a bigger fund too eventually, and that will be even a wider net that we'll cast on that.
That was the next question. Is you mentioned that it looks like you're closing, so just wanted to get the logistics of closing this fund coming up. Does that mean that you guys are out of business, or does that mean that that's the first stepping stone, and then now you grow to even exponentially larger?
Yeah, the first thing I'll say, there's a couple sides to Raven. What we've talked about is the fun in investing in businesses on the ground and in towns and cities. We also do some pioneering work in outcomes financing, which is really a community level response. So let's say, and the big one we're working on is on diabetes reduction in 6 First Nations communities. So bringing what's called an outcomes contract, which I eventually believe it'll be a diabetes reduction bond that'll be open to the public market to buy into, to have Indigenous-led interventions to reduce diabetes in community, because it's such a crisis. So it's a community level. While we're dealing with enterprises on the fund, this is a community level response. The third thing that we do is we have what's called the Fireweed Fellowship, which we recognize as an expert service provider by the Government of Canada. Gave us a little bit of seed money to get going and build an Indigenous-only curriculum for Indigenous women. This first cohort is Indigenous women, and it's a investment readiness accelerator. So it's a year-long program to get businesses just pre-capital ready. Sorry, that was a long intro to answer your question. So we have other business lines that we do work. We do a little bit of advisory work. But at the heart of hearts, we're actually going to look at a second fund. And it's, there's a lot of things unknown about a fund. The one thing that we can be sure of is we're going to target probably somewhere between, 50 to 75 million on the second fund. That will change the type and nature of the businesses that we invest in. It'll change the quantum that we invest in. And we think it's really exciting. Now, what's really important about a fund too, is because there's no other venture capital, Indigenous venture capital in the ecosystem. The businesses from Fund 1 who continue to grow and do really well might also need capital. Like, we might also need to follow on through a Fund 2 and kind of, if they want that and if they're able to grow or not find other. A couple of the businesses we have would take mainstream investment in a heartbeat. Like, the big venture funds would go after them in a heartbeat. They're that good. But in some senses, we want Fund 2 to expand the marketplace. I mean, there's 45 or 55,000 Indigenous businesses in Canada. There's a lot of need for capital out there, not just equity capital, but private equity, which is big acquisitions and mergers type stuff, and then debt-based capital, which is loans. So, we have plans to kind of grow, but we need to grow. People think investment firms are full of lots of people. You have these big investment firms. No, we're tiny. There's 6 of us running all this stuff. So we're small, but when we grow, we'll add probably another fund, and we'll probably, because that's what we're good at, is this interaction with the entrepreneurs and the businesses. So we're going to swim in our lanes in terms of what we're doing, but we'll probably dip our toe into the US market and do for a few investments with our Indigenous brothers and sisters down south. So that's one thing that we're looking at.
It's all very exciting. I mean, I've been doing another a podcast as well called The Backbone, and it's a small business-based podcast. And I've been speaking with small business owners on both sides of the border since the COVID thing hit. It's interesting to hear and encouraging to hear what you're doing, because the idea that we had, and this is why I love doing the show with the mayor, it's connecting people across disparate communities. So with the mayor, we're able to get sort of a conscious government perspective on life, and then we're also able to tap into small business owners, which are running things out there, that are boots on the ground, that are feeling the impact of COVID, and then trying to keep things going. So it's very encouraging to hear an organization such as Raven Indigenous Capital Partners that's out there, that's looking to help people on multiple levels. Thank you very much, Jeff, for coming on board. I appreciate being part of the Mayor Helps today.
Yeah, no problem. It's an honor to be invited, and nice to see Lisa again.
Yeah,
the mayor,
you
the
too.
mayor. I should say the mayor.
No, Lisa's good. That's the name I was born with, and hopefully life will get back to normal and we can go have dinner again sometime.
Let's do that. Come out to Victoria, see some of our investees, and have dinner would be great.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll look forward to that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll be in touch. Take care.
Take care.
If you enjoyed the show, please like, share, and subscribe. And visit themayorhelps.com to submit your questions to the show.